Titanic's wreck sits silently under nearly 4,000 meters, 12,500 feet of water. The ship is a time capsule for the Edwardian Age, a steel sarcophagus for some of its passengers and crew who were never able to make it out. For example, somewhere deep in the bow, in one of the boiler rooms, are the remains of engineer Jonathan Shepard, who wasn't able to make it out before the room flooded. But Titanic is also the final resting place of countless things, personal items, and a large complement of cargo that were gone as well. When Titanic had taken on cargo at Southampton, tons and tons of stuff was hauled from the dockside and into awaiting holds deep below, and it's all still down there. Some of the items lost were more noteworthy and created headlines. Others even served as inspiration for memorable scenes on film or even plot points in video games. But many of the items stored on board were more mundane, but the contents made up the majority of what was being stored deep in the belly of an ocean liner, and it's an interesting snapshot of life back then, when the world's largest and most glamorous passenger ship doubled as a utilitarian cargo vessel as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs, and this is what was, and still is, in Titanic's cargo holds. In another video on the channel, we discussed some of the lost treasures of Titanic. These were made up of some of the more prominent, famous, and even eccentric items kept on board, like, for example, the jewel-encrusted copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of Persian poetry, which was lost with the ship. It's believed that the Rubaiyat was travelling with the first-class passenger Harry Elkins Wilder, a well-known collector of books, and it even ended up serving as a key plot point in the game Titanic Adventure Out of Time. Also on board Titanic was a rather famous Renault Type CB Coupe de Ville, owned by fellow first-class passenger William Carter. This thing almost doesn't need an introduction because, of course, it played a rather prominent role in James Cameron's film Titanic, although it's thought that the actual vehicle was boxed in a container in real life for safe travel across the ocean. Although Carter and his family were all fortunate to survive the sinking, the Renault was lost, never to be seen again, although Cameron did try looking for it in 2001. There was plenty of art on board as well. One treasure that we've touched upon was the Circassien Aubin painting, often appraised as the most valuable item lost on Titanic. Its owner filed a whopping $100,000 claim for the painting against the White Star Line, worth millions today. But not all cargo aboard Titanic was as glamorous as cars or original paintings or jewel-encrusted books. The ship was designed to carry much more mundane things, and its cargo manifest still makes for very interesting reading. See, the importance of cargo handling on passenger ships at the time is probably best demonstrated by liners on the far-flung Australian service, like P&O's Multan of 1923, which boasted no fewer than 16 enormous hydraulic cranes in pairs, which ran down the length of the upper deck like a great forest of redwood trees. Of course, Titanic was first and foremost a passenger liner, but cargo capacity was of huge importance for ships in those days. For one thing, the voluminous holds afforded by big passenger steamers of the day provided a massive blank space that shipping lines could capitalize on simply to earn revenue. Now, this was long before the days of shipping containers and specialized cargo carrying equipment, so if a ship had space, it could carry just about anything. Titanic's most important cargo was its mail. This was the crucial stuff that express passenger liners loaded at either side of the Atlantic. Merchants, business owners, and politicians relied on the timely delivery of letters, parcels, and packages. The fact that steamships competed against one another for speed was a happy coincidence for the world's mail services, which needed the fastest delivery methods to maintain their regular services. If storms blew in, like they did in early 1910 for around 4 weeks, they could bring the transatlantic mail service to a grinding halt, and a delayed ocean liner inevitably meant delayed mail, a huge source of frustration to many professionals. The mail service paid lucrative contracts to the express shipping lines to maintain their service. In fact, the RMS in RMS Titanic stands for Royal Mail Steamer, a badge of honor that only the fastest and most reliable steamships could carry as a prefix. When the Titanic sank, it's estimated she was carrying around 3,500 sacks of mail on board. Each sack could carry around 2,000 letters, which meant there could have been upwards of 7 million pieces of mail lost thanks to the sinking. A good portion of Titanic's hold was then dedicated to luggage bound for the New World. These would be the steamer trunks and bags that passengers didn't want to carry with them in their staterooms. They'd be brought to the dockside, and the baggage could be labelled with a "not wanted" sticker or tag and left behind. They'd then be loaded into the ship. It was actually a fairly similar process to today's check-in baggage at airports. But most of the space in the ship's massive, cavernous multi-deck holds was dedicated to general cargo. Now, generally the ship was laid out so that the holds forward in the bow were used to load general cargo, the previously mentioned motor car, baggage for first-class passengers, and mail and parcels, while the holds aft towards the stern would be used for items that didn't require insulation, those that actually did, like refrigerated goods, baggage for those travelling in third class, and almost all of the ship's provisions like potatoes, beer kegs, beef, and so on. Now, actually loading all this cargo aboard Titanic at port was a monumental task, and the ship was well equipped to handle it. She was fitted with no fewer than 8 electric cranes positioned near their hatches to help load the ship as quickly as possible. In the past, steam winches or hydraulic cranes had been used, but Titanic's passenger spaces actually hosted the cargo loading machinery, so newer electric motors were chosen because of their quiet, considerate operation. The foremast at the bow of the ship was fitted with a derrick, which is essentially a pivoting crane arm used for loading cargo onto the ship's deck from the dockside. On the ship's short stay in Southampton, from early April to the 10th, she loaded a huge quantity of weird and wonderful things. Some you'd expect, others you might not. So what's still locked down there in her holds? Fortunately, the cargo manifest survives. It gives us a glimpse into the kinds of things the world's most luxurious passenger liner would have carried. $420,000 of goods in 1912, or over $13.8 million in today's money, filled Titanic's cargo holds, and even the more mundane items could still add up to a sizable value. For example, Geo B. Alden and Company loaded 51 cases of rubber aboard at a value of $14,773. That's just under $500,000 today. Roethlisberger and Company alone carried 190 bundles of cheese, valued at $12,365. That's just over $400,000 today. In fact, cheese was a pretty common cargo on Titanic. No fewer than 13 companies had filled the ship's holds with the stuff. Some of the cargo was a little less mundane and would definitely turn heads today. For example, Powers, Waitman, Rosengarten, who shipped 12 cases of opium, which was still legal at the time as a painkiller. The shipment was worth just under $1 million today. The cargo manifest references auto parts shipped by a G. Prost. At the time, Henry Ford was still perfecting his Model T's production line, but American buyers had a taste for fine French, German, and Italian cars instead to give an air of lofty elegance. Of course, the parts for these would be difficult to get, and many had to be custom ordered from their manufacturers back in Europe. You wonder if some American car owners had delays on repairs because their parts were lost with the Titanic. Perhaps somewhat surprisingly, there were several cases of bird feathers shipped, about 12 cases of ostrich feathers in particular. Hard as it may be to believe though, these were some of the most valuable items aboard the ship when she was lost. At the time of sailing, only diamonds were worth more per weight than ostrich feathers. The feathers aboard Titanic were insured for what would be about $2.3 million in today's money. So why would bird feathers of all things be so valuable? Well, the answer is high fashion. The use of ostrich feathers in fashion was nothing new. In fact, it had been used for centuries by the time of Titanic's crossing, but the Victorian era saw a huge spike in popularity that carried over to the Edwardian era, especially with hats. The more feathers on your hat, the more fashionable you were, and the bigger statement you were making. Hats became so big and fluffy, you'd think that a single one could almost have enough feathers to make up an entire bird's worth. This fashion obsession grew, and feathers were soon being incorporated into dresses, boas, fans, and parasols. Women of high society would wear elaborate feathered gowns to important events and dinners to stand out from the rest of the crowd. And while ostrich feathers are still used today, the peak of their popularity began to wane with the outbreak of the First World War and the Great Depression. The manifest lists a real mix of things that wouldn't be out of place today, and then things that really would. For example, the American Express Company boasts probably the most varied entry. 1 case of Edison gramophones, a case of elastics, 4 cases of hosiery, 9 cases of books, and then 1 each of canvas, rubber goods, tweed, plants, speedometers, 3 cases of cameras and their stands, and 6 cases of film. In fact, there are about 8 cases of that stuff on board. This isn't surprising because still photography had been really maturing since the 19th century, and the use of motion capture was now beginning to rise. Second-class passenger William H. Harbeck, a photographer, was aboard the ship. Before Titanic, he'd filmed footage of British Columbia and San Francisco after the earthquake of 1906. He'd also shot scenes in remote Alaska that he showed off in London, Paris, Moscow, and Berlin. He'd even show footage to President Taft. Harbeck loaded 110,000 feet of film aboard Titanic, enough for about 100 reels, along with 2 film cameras. According to the Motion Picture News, Harbeck had signed a contract with the White Star Line to take videos of the ship on her crossing. Although this hasn't been verified, what we do know is that Harbeck was filming during his time on board because Lawrence Beasley wrote in his book following the disaster that he witnessed an American filming the ship leaving Southampton, as well as filming the near collision with the SS New York. In a letter to a friend, Harbeck suggested that he wanted to leave Titanic before she got to New York so he could film her arrival on a tugboat. Along with all his film and recording equipment, Harbeck carried a bit of scandal on board as well with him. He'd boarded the ship with a young woman, Henriette Ivoire, who he claimed to be his wife. His wife, though, she certainly was not. Henriette was a French model, and Harbeck's actual wife was back at home. Neither Harbeck nor Ivoire survived the sinking, and any footage he may have shot was lost with the ship as well. Eventually, a $55,000 insurance claim was filed for the lost film. Most tragically of all, Harbeck's actual wife had to learn of both her husband's death and his mysterious young companion at the same time. Whitcomb, McLaughlin and Company were shipping an enormous consignment of linoleum, about 856 rolls of the stuff. In fact, Titanic was decorated with linoleum herself, although this isn't the kind of plastic lino you'd find in your grandma's kitchen. Back then, linoleum was thick, tough, and made mostly of linseed oil, reserved for some of the finest homes as an alternative to marble or ceramic tiles. One of the more dramatic entries in the manifest is for Brown Brother and Company for 76 cases of, believe it or not, dragon's blood. No, Titanic didn't take place in the Game of Thrones universe. Dragon's blood was an archaic name for a palm tree sap, red in colour, that could be used to stain wood varnish and be added to women's makeup. It was also used at the time for medicinal purposes, treating wounds and reducing inflammation. Lasker and Bernstein loaded 117 cases of sponges, F.B. Vandergrift and Company, 63 cases of champagne, Pitt and Scott, a big selection of printing material, machinery, books and merchandise, Pape, Chase and Company loaded in more than 1,000 bags of potatoes. Meanwhile, the Anderson Refrigerator Machinery Company, 11 big boxes of fridge parts. There were medicines and syrups loaded by P.W. Engs and Sons, fine wines and cognacs for a Mr. Van Rensselaer, 107 cases of mushrooms for Knauth, Natchard and Kuna, and a simply staggering volume of shelled walnuts, over 310 cases and 100 bales. Notably, the Aero Club of America was shipping a case of nondescript machinery, but you wonder if this was really a case of components for a Blériot aircraft or an engine. Of course, all of this and more was lost, coming to rest almost 4 kilometers at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. So what, if anything, would survive to this day? Well, actually, a good amount of the stuff could still be intact down there, especially the refrigerator parts, the Aero Club machinery, the car parts, really anything made of metal. In 2001, James Cameron had a little snoop around inside one of the main forward cargo holds with an ROV, but unfortunately a huge amount of silt had buried the floor of the hold, making it difficult to picture exactly what he was seeing. Of course, anything organic, like the fabrics and the cheeses, are most likely long gone by now. But the rubber goods, and perhaps even the feathers, might still be partially intact, still resting where they were loaded that day back in 1912. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we get new videos out weekly. If you want to support my work and get really cool perks like behind the scenes and early access, please visit my Patreon in the link in the description below, or sign up as a YouTube member. Come and join the crew. And as always, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you again next time.